In the interrogation room, the police were giving a young man a full-body inspection. Hyun-soo, visibly upset, struggled as they restrained him. The officers then sprayed a special forensic reagent on his body and turned off the lights. Under the black light, a horrifying sight appeared, bloody handprints all over his hair, face, and body. For a moment, Hyun-soo was speechless. He had no idea how he had woken up to become a murder suspect on the run. Hyun-soo had always been a model student, excelling both academically and in behavior. While his classmates celebrated the end of exams, he was still thinking about the report he needed to finish that evening. After a hearty meal, he suddenly got news that the report had been cancelled. Bored at home, he thought of attending a friend's party. Seizing a moment when his father wasn't paying attention, he stole the car keys and cleverly unplugged the dashcam to avoid leaving evidence. Since he was driving a taxi, people on the street occasionally tried to hail him. In a hurry to get to the party, Hyun-soo ignored them all. But while waiting at a red light, a young woman suddenly got into his car. Hyun-soo quickly explained that he was off duty, but she ignored him and even threatened to file a complaint for refusing service. Caught off guard, he reluctantly agreed to take her. Halfway through the ride, a friend called to urge him to come faster. That's when Hyun-soo realized he hadn't even asked where she was headed. The girl casually said, Han River, which fortunately wasn't far. Once they arrived, she led him to buy ice cream. As he was about to pay, she suddenly told him to run. This was the first time Hyun-soo, always the good student, had ever done something so impulsive. Something about the girl, quirky and bold, deeply attracted him. They went to the riverside together, where she took out a small candy and ate it with syrup, then offered one to him. Curious, Hyun-soo accepted. Afterward, he drove her home safely. To thank him, she warmly invited him inside. The two had drinks and talked. At that moment, Hyun-soo had no idea that he was on the brink of disaster. After a few drinks, things got heated. Hyun-soo accidentally pricked her hand, but strangely, she didn't cry out. She even seemed to enjoy it. In the dark, the two young people became physically intimate and moved upstairs to continue their night. Though Hyun-soo missed the party, he unexpectedly found himself caught in a passionate encounter. All in all, it didn't seem like a bad trade-off. Judging by the scratch marks all over him, she had clearly enjoyed herself. The next morning, Hyun-soo got dressed and prepared to say goodbye, only to discover the girl lying in bed, cold and covered in blood. Horrified, Hyun-soo attempted to drive off, but realized he had left the keys inside the house. He returned, only to find the door locked. In desperation, he broke a window and reached in to grab the door handle, but the noise alerted a neighbor. Panicking, he ran into the living room, found his coat, and in the process noticed a small knife and a tissue on the table. He hastily wiped things down and fled with the knife. All of this was seen clearly by the old man next door. Distraught and jittery, Hyun-soo soon encountered police at an intersection. Trying to remain calm, he hid the knife in his pocket, but the officers noticed his nervous, evasive expression and asked him to step out of the car for inspection. Luckily for Hyun-soo, the breathalyzer was out of battery. At that very moment, the police received a call from headquarters about a nearby robbery reported by a citizen. Just as he thought he might escape trouble, unexpectedly, the police took the boy away with them too. Even worse, the place they were heading to was the girl's place. He tried to escape, but the car door wouldn't open at all. Soon after, the officers who had gone inside to investigate came rushing back out. The police were too busy with the new developments to bother with Hyun-soo, so he ended up being taken to the station as well. Just as he was about to quietly slip away, he saw the old man. Afraid of being recognized, Hyun-soo quickly turned around and sat down. At the same time, his father realized the taxi was missing and called Hyun-soo. Too afraid to answer, Hyun-soo ignored the call and decided to take a gamble and escape. But before he could even move, the police officers had already returned to the scene. An experienced detective noticed Hyun-soo acting suspiciously. The detective ordered his colleague to search Hyun-soo. Moments later, the officer found a blood-stained knife hidden on him. The veteran detective immediately gave the order to arrest Hyun-soo. Hyun-soo resisted but was quickly subdued on the spot. The police began interrogating him, but Hyun-soo kept pleading his innocence, insisting he wasn't the killer. However, the seasoned detective wasn't about to believe a suspect's words alone. He took Hyun-soo to the forensics room and sprayed a special reagent on him. When the lights were turned off, the results shocked everyone present. Blood traces clearly lit up under the blacklight. With that, Hyun-soo was officially detained. As he sat in the holding area, a young lawyer walking past took notice of him. Surprised that someone so young had been arrested, the lawyer inquired with the police and ultimately decided to represent Hyun-soo voluntarily. "You never paid attention," the lawyer said, "and now you're in trouble." The details of the cooperation between the lawyer and Hyun-soo remained private, but what mattered was that he now had someone willing to help him fight this. The case itself quickly became national news across South Korea. A young woman who lived alone had been brutally murdered in her own home, stabbed 13 times. The prime suspect? A completely ordinary college student who had just turned 20. The evidence was damning: fingerprints and blood at the scene, the murder weapon found on him, and a witness account. To the public and police alike, the boy was guilty beyond doubt. Hyun-soo was placed in temporary detention, consumed by confusion and fear. How had he woken up from one night and found himself turned into a heartless killer? But with overwhelming evidence, thankfully, the righteous young lawyer extended a helping hand. The case was being handled by a veteran detective with only 3 months left until retirement. He had years of experience and a solid reputation. The young lawyer sternly reminded Hyun-soo not to speak carelessly. Meanwhile, the police chief called the veteran detective into his office to ask about the progress of the case. For the detective, this was likely the final case of his career. And for the chief, it could be a high-profile success story. If the suspect could confess voluntarily, it would be the perfect conclusion. The chief assured the detective that if he handled this case well, there would be a promising post-retirement opportunity waiting for him. The veteran then revisited the crime scene. He discovered that Hyun-soo had a medical condition. Quietly, the detective took a can of medication spray left at the scene. He deliberately sent his team away and met with Hyun-soo alone, handing him the spray. Unbeknownst to Hyun-soo, that spray was crucial evidence supporting his innocence. How could someone with that condition possibly commit a brutal murder so effortlessly? A person suffering from photosensitive epilepsy couldn't have managed to stab a victim 13 times without triggering an episode. The veteran detective then tried a softer approach, telling Hyun-soo that the taxi would be returned and that his father wouldn't need to worry. But Hyun-soo, remembering his lawyer's advice, refused to discuss the case. Frustrated, the detective immediately ordered that Hyun-soo be sent for prosecution. However, before the case could even be submitted to the prosecutor's office, the brutal nature of the murder catapulted it into the national spotlight. The case's cruelty and social impact prompted prosecutors to recommend severe punishment, urging the judge to come down hard. Lawyer Shin, on the other hand, argued that all the evidence against Hyun-soo was circumstantial. Nonetheless, Hyun-soo was placed under custody for further investigation, meaning he would now enter prison. A series of unforeseen events had led this ordinary college student behind bars. A once outstanding student now bore the label of a suspect in a savage, 13-stab murder. Though Hyun-soo remained convinced of his innocence, the veteran detective who had worked in the field for 30 years wasn't so sure. He pointed out that Hyun-soo had 3 opportunities to turn himself in the night of the murder: when he discovered the body, when he encountered the police while fleeing, and while he was at the station waiting for questioning. Yet, Hyun-soo claimed he had no recollection of what happened and continuously tried to avoid responsibility. Lawyer Shin still believed in Hyun-soo's innocence, viewing his escape attempts as panicked, subconscious reactions rather than signs of guilt. But the veteran detective insisted that it's often those who look least likely to commit crimes who are actually hiding behind angelic masks. To make his point, he even pulled out a photo of Hyun-soo as a child. Following his formal detention, Hyun-soo was processed and placed into prison. After the intake photos, he stood with other new inmates waiting to be assigned cells. Because he hadn't yet been sentenced, his clothes differed from the others, drawing curious and judgmental stares. A prison guard shot him a menacing look as he was led into the cell. Inside, one of the cellmates appeared to be suffering from anxiety. This unsettled Hyun-soo. Thankfully, an older inmate explained that the man had a common prison panic disorder. The next day, Hyun-soo saw that same timid inmate being bullied by a group of thugs, until a man in a short-sleeved shirt stepped in and the bullying stopped. Hyun-soo sensed the strange dynamics in the prison. Later, when he returned to his cell, Hyun-soo was suddenly grabbed and pinned against the wall by those same thugs. One of them pulled out a makeshift razor, threatening to teach him a lesson. Just as Hyun-soo struggled desperately, a whistle sounded outside the cell. It was the man in the short sleeves. His timely appearance saved Hyun-soo from further harm. Meanwhile, lawyer Shin visited Hyun-soo's parents and learned that their financial situation was strained. He discreetly lowered his legal fees, but even then, they found it hard to afford. Moved by their plight, Shin further reduced the cost, promising to do everything he could to help their son. Soon after, he confronted the case's prosecutor at a press conference. Due to the cruelty of the crime, Hyun-soo's identity had been made public, sparking widespread fear. Even the prison's hardened inmates were shocked that such a gentle-looking boy could be behind such a brutal act. Realizing the danger, Hyun-soo tried to flee again and called lawyer Shin for help. But Shin quickly interrupted, reminding him that all prison calls were recorded, so he needed to be extremely careful with his words. As the press conference wrapped up, Shin stopped a reporter and challenged the prosecutor for violating human rights by exposing the suspect's identity without any direct evidence. Shin hoped to use public opinion to buy more time for his investigation. On his way back to the cell, he was suddenly ambushed. His head covered with a black cloth and his limbs tightly bound by a group of thugs who dragged him into a dark, isolated room. As is often the case in prison, newcomers like him were easy targets. He was strung up and beaten until the guards outside intervened, forcing the attackers to leave. Soon after, the prison's influential inmate, Tego, approached Hyun-soo. After hearing what had happened, Hyun-soo couldn't help but feel a lingering fear. Tego offered him protection, telling him to come find him if he ever needed help. Outside the prison walls, the public outcry surrounding Hyun-soo's case had attracted the attention of another legal figure, Attorney Cho, a top lawyer from a prestigious firm. He contacted Hyun-soo's parents, dismissing lawyer Shin as an irresponsible, third-rate attorney who only cared about charging high legal fees. Cho confidently pitched his own legal team and offered to take on Hyun-soo's case for free. For a struggling family like Hyun-soo's, this seemed like a miracle. His father quickly called Hyun-soo, reassuring him that the best lawyer was now on his side and that he didn't need to worry anymore. Unaware of this switch, lawyer Shin still thoughtfully brought Hyun-soo some personal clothes and 2 vouchers for the prison commissary. Touched and feeling guilty, Hyun-soo reluctantly told Shin that his parents had decided to replace him. Deeply ashamed, he bowed repeatedly, expressing his sincere gratitude and regret for having to part ways. One day, Hyun-soo noticed inmates discreetly passing cigarettes. He didn't get involved. Later, during lunch, Tego's men found the smugglers and gave them a rough warning. Back in the cell, an older inmate explained to Hyun-soo that in prison, anything could be bought with power, bags, pills, even bodies. Everything had a price. Soon after, Tego's men approached Hyun-soo again, asking him to identify the cigarette smugglers. Not wanting to get anyone hurt, Hyun-soo lied and claimed the culprits weren't among them. But Tego made it clear, if they didn't find the offenders, everyone would suffer. Even under pressure, Hyun-soo refused to point fingers. That night, Hyun-soo was jolted awake by a nightmare, only to see his panicked cellmate hanging from the ceiling. He immediately woke the older inmate, but it was too late. The timid young man was already dead. Before Hyun-soo could recover, the thugs who had threatened him earlier gave him another sinister warning. Living in such fear, Hyun-soo was eventually subdued by the guards after trying to escape. Life in prison was unbearably cruel. A place where the weak had no place but to suffer, no matter how hard they tried to avoid confrontation. Enduring only led to more torment. For many inmates, death felt like the only escape. Seeing his cellmate die right before his eyes, Hyun-soo panicked and fled, only to be caught and thrown into solitary confinement. Ironically, the thug responsible for bullying the dead cellmate was also thrown into the same isolation block. He assumed Hyun-soo had ratted him out and, seething with rage, clawed at the bars and swore he'd get revenge the moment they got out. Unbeknownst to him, The veteran detective and prosecutor were plotting something far worse. Still convinced of Hyun-soo's guilt, they decided to speed up the process and administer a polygraph test. They deliberately waved documents in front of Hyun-soo to rattle him. Hyun-soo, visibly tense, was then threatened by the prosecutor. If he continued like this, he'd be formally charged and have no hope of escape. Their only proposal? Pass the lie detector test and prove his innocence. But there was one problem. The authorities knew full well that Hyun-soo had asthma, and people with respiratory conditions aren't medically eligible for polygraph testing. Yet they were willing to risk it all to force a confession and close the case. Sensing hesitation in Hyun-soo, the veteran officer softened his tone, while the prosecutor played the harsher role. One played the good cop, the other the bad. Caught between pressure and persuasion, Hyun-soo reluctantly agreed. To maximize the pressure, the detective showed Hyun-soo one final video of the victim before the test. It was a calculated move, a last-minute emotional strike meant to rattle him. The plan worked. The shock triggered an asthma attack. But instead of helping, the detective used this as an excuse to confiscate Hyun-soo's inhaler, saying medication wasn't allowed before testing. Everything was set. Just as the session was about to begin, lawyer Shin arrived. Concerned for Hyun-soo's well-being, he warned him that polygraph results aren't admissible in court. But Hyun-soo, trusting and eager to clear his name, insisted he only wanted to prove his innocence. The detective even mockingly placed the inhaler in plain sight, telling Hyun-soo he could use it after the test, a cruel psychological tactic agreed upon with the prosecutor. The test began. At first, simple baseline questions were asked, and Hyun-soo answered them without difficulty. But when the examiner asked if he had killed anyone, disturbing flashes from that night suddenly invaded his mind. Images from the game, the crime scene, chaos. He hesitated, then answered, no, but the machine picked up his spike in heart rate. More complex, targeted questions followed. Hyun-soo's panic grew as he stared at the inhaler just out of reach. The questions cut deeper. His pulse quickened. Just as his breathing reached a dangerous point, lawyer Shin intervened again, stopping things from spiraling completely out of control. Later, in the grim monotony of prison life, Tego gave Hyun-soo a 100,000 won prison commissary card. With it, one could buy cigarettes, an important currency behind bars. Tego, knowing Hyun-soo didn't smoke, still had one of his men give him a pack. Strangely, Hyun-soo asked for another pack. Hyun-soo quickly handed both packs to the thug who had been threatening him. Earlier that day, this inmate had pulled out a handmade razor and told Hyun-soo to do something for him. But when the thug saw there were only 2 packs, he wanted 3. Without warning, he slammed Hyun-soo against the wall and delivered a brutal headbutt. Blood gushed from Hyun-soo's nose. The thug warned Hyun-soo, if he didn't get him 3 packs by tomorrow, there'd be hell to pay. The older cellmate stepped in, scaring the thug off. Hyun-soo finally caught a breath. That night, however, he was once again jolted awake by a nightmare. Ever since his timid cellmate had hanged himself right in front of him, Hyun-soo had been plagued by recurring visions. Unable to cope, Hyun-soo reluctantly called his father and asked for another $1,000,000 to buy more commissary credit. When the money came through, he went straight to Tego again, who, despite prison rules, once more broke protocol and sold him 2 packs. Hyun-soo passed them to the thug, thinking that would finally settle the matter. It didn't. The thug flew into a rage over a new excuse, this time more absurd than the last. He pinned Hyun-soo down. Just then, Tego appeared. The thug scattered like a rat, clearly terrified. Seeing how brutally Hyun-soo had been treated, Tego decided to take matters into his own hands. The next day, he led Hyun-soo to the prison kitchen, where the thug who'd been tormenting him was already tied up. Tego had him beaten savagely by his men. He even poured scalding water on him. When guards eventually arrived, they didn't dare challenge Tego's authority, they merely took the thug away. Hyun-soo was stunned. Even in prison, Tego had power, so much so that he could intervene in a warden's personal family matters and even knew intimate details about Hyun-soo's own home life. But there was a price to pay for Tego's protection. It became clear this help wasn't free. One of Tego's men suddenly injected Hyun-soo with something. Crack! His arm was dislocated. A staged injury. Hyun-soo was quickly sent to the hospital, where the doctor reset his shoulder and wrapped it in thick gauze. Upon his return to the prison, the guards barely questioned anything. Tego immediately confiscated the bandages. He soaked them in water, extracting a white powder hidden inside. It all clicked. Tego had manipulated the entire situation so that Hyun-soo could smuggle drugs into the prison for him. Meanwhile, outside the prison walls, a woman in high heels walked down a hallway, catching the attention of a scruffy, bearded middle-aged man, Lawyer Sung. The woman smiled awkwardly as she entered his apartment with her assistant. The assistant explained that due to Hyun-soo's sudden refusal to plead guilty in court, their lead attorney, Jo, was furious and initially planned to drop the case altogether. But walking away felt like a stain on her reputation. So instead, Jo passed the case on to her assistant. But it was clearly too complex for a junior lawyer to handle. The assistant came to beg Lawyer Sung for help. Sung named his price, 30 million won. Surprisingly, the assistant agreed without hesitation. When Sung next visited Hyun-soo in prison, he signed the new representation contract. Sung told him to hold on, even the tiniest hope is hope, and vowed to do everything in his power to prove his innocence. Sung then enlisted the help of his ex-wife, who worked in administration, to reinvestigate the crime scene. She quickly found several inconsistencies. The back door of the villa couldn't be locked. The murder weapon appeared to be part of a set, yet 2 knives were missing from the drawer. This raised serious doubts about the prosecution's case. Meanwhile, the prosecutor, using connections, contacted someone at the National Forensic Center and produced a photo of the injury on Hyun-soo's hand. The prosecution's strategy became clear. They wanted the forensic expert to testify in court that Hyun-soo's hand injury had occurred during the murder, suggesting it happened while he was struggling with the victim. But the truth was very different. Hyun-soo had accidentally cut himself when he returned to the scene later. The next court session arrived quickly. Tego, trying to help, offered Hyun-soo a crisp white shirt to wear in court. But Hyun-soo insisted on wearing the blue shirt his mother had given him. When defense lawyer Sung saw it, he immediately switched shirts with Hyun-soo. The third trial session began. The judge allowed the prosecution to make its opening statement. The prosecutor laid out 117 pieces of evidence, including graphic crime scene photos of the victim. Then came a bombshell. A forensic expert from the National Crime Lab presented a manipulated simulation, a CGI recreation of chest wounds, claiming they matched Hyun-soo's body and movements, implying he was the killer. The courtroom fell into uneasy silence. But Lawyer Sung wasn't shaken. He reminded everyone that Hyun-soo had been under the influence of asthma medication, alcohol, and possibly even drugs on the night of the incident, enough to knock out an average adult and cause memory loss. The coroner confirmed that such a condition could indeed result in blackouts and confusion. But the prosecutor had one last, devastating move. He petitioned for the jury to return to the crime scene and participate in a reconstruction. He knew the emotional weight of seeing the real, blood-stained setting would influence the jurors far more than any argument. It would also emotionally destabilize Hyun-soo. Dark clouds hung overhead as the large group, jurors, police officers, press, and onlookers, gathered at the villa where the murder had taken place. Hyun-soo, handcuffed, watched the crowd swarm. His heart raced with anxiety. Inside, the reconstruction began. A detective violently yanked the victim mannequin's head back. An experienced officer narrated every move, pointing out details for the jury. As the simulation played out, flashbacks began to blur through Hyun-soo's mind. Then they moved into the victim's actual bedroom, meticulously reconstructed by police to match the original scene. Surrounded by the physical remnants of the murder, Hyun-soo was overwhelmed. He began to believe the worst, that maybe he had committed the crime. The mental pressure triggered another asthma attack, and he collapsed on the spot. The next thing he knew, he was waking up in a hospital bed. Still believing Hyun-soo was guilty, the veteran detective whispered manipulative lies into his ear while he was barely conscious, hoping to push him into confession. Meanwhile, due to a sudden skin infection, Lawyer Sung decided that he would skip the upcoming trial session, fearing that his condition would hurt his performance in court. The case was handed over to the rookie lawyer, attorney Seo, who was about to face her very first trial in his career. But as soon as she started, her phone unexpectedly rang. After the traffic police finished presenting the case files, attorney Seo quickly raised a challenge. She pointed out that the police had arrested Hyun-soo without a warrant and brought him to the crime scene, clearly a breach of procedure. Then, another officer testified that Hyun-soo had inquired about the victim's condition while in the police car. The officer assumed Hyun-soo was worried the victim might still be alive. However, attorney Seo argued that this could just as easily be interpreted as concern for the victim. Digging deeper, Seo discovered from the police car's dashcam footage that officers had been piecing together the case numbers into a sort of lucky number sequence. Two witnesses were left speechless by this revelation. The prosecutor responded by bringing in Hyun-soo's high school homeroom teacher. It was said that Hyun-soo had once been punished for bullying a classmate named Oda. But in fact, Hyun-soo had only hit the classmate because the latter had mocked his father. He hadn't told the school the truth to avoid embarrassing his dad. Later, Hyun-soo reconciled with his classmates and was forgiven. Attorney Seo appealed to the judge, saying this was his first trial and he had also made mistakes due to nervousness. He asked if the police's improper conduct, the officer's insensitive remarks about the victim, or Hyun-soo's efforts to protect his father's dignity couldn't be forgiven. The prosecution, lacking direct evidence, kept trying to prove the defendant's guilt, but attorney Seo's arguments caused many in the courtroom to soften their stance toward Hyun-soo. The prosecutor had never expected to be schooled by such a novice. After the trial ended, lawyer Shin immediately sought out Hyun-soo to ask about the whereabouts of the victim's knife. Hyun-soo said he didn't have the knife, implying there must have been a third person at the crime scene. Then, Shin asked if the victim had ever mentioned a daughter. Hyun-soo confirmed. The victim's daughter clearly held some secrets. Shin had even seen this daughter during the crime scene reenactment. Quickly, she tracked down the woman in the photo. At this moment, the woman was also closely following the murder case. She was the head of the forensic department. And Tego was the person they wanted to pin the drug smuggling on. The department head told Tego he already had evidence of Hyun-soo helping him traffic drugs. Meanwhile, Hyun-soo was being interrogated. The woman advised him to confess. "I'm sorry," Hyun-soo kept repeating. Her expression faltered when hearing his words, unaware that the drugs were hidden in the bandages on his arm. She told him their target was Tego, hoping Hyun-soo would cooperate, while she took the blame herself. Meanwhile, the forensic head began threatening Tego, saying he could easily transfer him to a lower security prison with his authority. But Tego remained calm, asking him some pointed questions. Soon, a phone call came through. The department head glanced at his subordinates and realized the trip had been a waste. Later, to thank Hyun-soo for his bravery, Tego gifted him a phone and helped recover the confiscated car from Hyun-soo's father. At the same time, lawyer Shin found the victim's estranged best friend, who confessed the source of the drugs. It was a certain man who sold the narcotics. But that man refused to say anything. Finding an excuse to step outside for a smoke, he easily obtained the recording of the man's recent phone call. Back inside, the team analyzed the recording. It turned out the man knew both the victim and her close friend, and he was actually in a romantic relationship with that friend. Soon after, Shin found from surveillance footage that a delivery guy at a gas station had also interacted with the victim, and was seen lingering around Hyun-soo's car afterward. Following the trail, Shin tracked down the delivery guy's workplace. However, since the delivery guy had hidden his record as a sex offender from his boss, he was fired. Using the boss's information, Shin quickly located the delivery guy. Under persistent questioning, the delivery guy lost his temper and threw an axe at Shin. Meanwhile, a new round of court hearings began. The veteran detective, who was certain of Hyun-soo's guilt, appeared in court to identify him and presented his own version of the murder. Sitting in the defendant's seat, Hyun-soo finally exploded with frustration. This only gave the detective more ammunition to claim Hyun-soo's violent genes were to blame. During this time, the prosecutor knew all of Hyun-soo's weak points and gave him no respite. The prosecutor taunted Hyun-soo, saying that if he had called the police immediately on the night of the crime, maybe the victim could have survived. The courtroom tension was intense. At one point, the defense lawyer launched a fierce verbal attack, and the prosecutor countered, nearly evenly matched. Only the timely arrival of a police officer friend prevented a disaster. The man was ultimately arrested on charges of attempted murder. Shin hurried to share this major breakthrough with her team, only to hear bad news. Due to relentless pressure from the prosecution, Hyun-soo not only failed to prove his innocence but also said something that severely harmed his case. At this point, Hyun-soo was physically and mentally exhausted, lying in his bed with doubts creeping into his mind. Even the older inmate in the same cell began to look down on him. "You better not die," the older inmate sneered. While cleaning the cell, Hyun-soo saw news reports about the jury's verdict. He slammed the wall in frustration. His low mood attracted the attention of the gangsters again, who came to taunt him with the newspaper proclaiming his guilt and flaunted the phone they had stolen from him. Later, when Hyun-soo tried to retrieve his phone, the gangsters beat him mercilessly. He struggled but was quickly overpowered. Facing the relentless bullying, Hyun-soo could only lie on the floor. Feeling utterly alone, Hyun-soo stood at the cell door in a daze, staring thoughtfully at Tego's room. He finally decided to seek help from Tego. Tego patiently explained the reason behind the injury on his arm. He shared that, like Hyun-soo, he had once endured a similar terrible ordeal when no one believed him. He hoped Hyun-soo could stay safe. With that, Tego finished his cigarette and flicked the ashes toward Hyun-soo. Hyun-soo didn't hesitate to take the cigarette directly. He finally decided he wanted to change his fate. Taking a drag, he put on a tough look and boldly declared himself the main character to the gangsters who had been bullying him. Soon the court resumed. Lawyer Shin reminded Hyun-soo to watch his behavior carefully. But Hyun-soo, who had lost hope long ago, didn't seem to care. Shin questioned the victim's close friend and her boyfriend. It turned out the boyfriend had been involved with the victim, and the friend had serious conflicts with her. Shockingly, the police hadn't interrogated either of them, causing an uproar. During this, the friend's sudden words caught Shin off guard. "Why me? I never thought he was innocent." Despite Shin's efforts, this court break led nowhere. But Shin noticed a dramatic change in Hyun-soo. One day, a rare news segment aired, defending Hyun-soo's case, but he turned off the TV without a word. Facing the discontent of others, he walked away fearlessly. Yet he soon ran into the persistent gangsters again. This time, Hyun-soo didn't avoid them, he ignored their provocations and walked past. Angered, a gangster grabbed him and challenged him to a one-on-one fight. Luckily, Tego had just been recording. Tego encouraged Hyun-soo. Win or lose, he had to face this showdown or it would haunt him forever. Back in his room, Hyun-soo made up his mind and got a haircut like Tego's. At the fight spot, the gangster didn't realize the danger ahead. As he approached, Hyun-soo swiftly pulled down his jacket, and when the gangster grabbed him again, Hyun-soo smashed a flower pot on him. Now strong and confident, Hyun-soo overwhelmed the gangster, who tried to fight back but was quickly knocked down. Just when another flower pot was about to fall, Hyun-soo's reason kicked in and he stopped short of causing serious harm. After the intense fight, Hyun-soo's panic attacks flared up again. Looking at his small can of spray, he angrily threw it away and tried to calm himself down. Another court hearing began. A suspicious man was brought in and questioned by lawyer Shin about the night of the crime. The man claimed it was just coincidence and avoided answering when asked about his criminal record or alibi. He refused to cooperate. Then Shin's assistant's ex-wife appeared as a witness, revealing key details. The balcony door was broken, allowing easy access. 2 kitchen knives were missing, besides the one Hyun-soo had, and Hyun-soo's injuries were not caused during the murder. If the police's assumptions were correct, these facts wouldn't add up. The key injury should have been on the fingers, but Hyun-soo is left-handed, while the forensic report concluded the killer used their right hand. This crucial evidence completely overturned all previous assumptions. How could a left-hander like Hyun-soo be the murderer? Back in prison, Hyun-soo copied some words from Tego, questioning the suspicious behavior of the victim's family. The victim's daughter was stabbed 13 times, yet her body was taken away only 3 days later. 700 million won insurance was claimed immediately, and within 5 days, a 5 billion won villa under her name was sold. But the police never investigated the family as suspects. Meanwhile, other suspicious individuals, including the victim's friend who had conflicts with her, the friend's boyfriend with a criminal record, and a delivery guy who had been stalking the victim were also never questioned by the police. Instead, they relentlessly focused on Hyun-soo, an ordinary student with no motive. When lawyer Shin asked about a piece of evidence left at the crime scene, a bamboo tray, the old detective couldn't answer because he had taken the tray supposedly for the defendant's safety. Shin challenged this as illegal and raised doubts with the jury, calling the trial meaningless. Then the police presented their next argument, which infuriated everyone. They admitted other suspects existed but argued the evidence was clear: the victim's death, the defendant, Hyun-soo, at the crime scene, no proof anyone else entered or left, and large amounts of the victim's blood on Hyun-soo's body. He hadn't reported the crime, and evidence suggested he tried to cover it up. Even a fruit found on him had the victim's blood. The prosecutor claimed nothing could be clearer than this evidence. The defendant's alleged violence and amnesia didn't matter. He deserved the death penalty. The next day, Tego gave Hyun-soo a farewell gift and reminded him that the final trial was approaching. Despite the sadness of leaving, Tego knew prison life wasn't right for Hyun-soo and hoped he would win the case and get out soon. Meanwhile, the scruffy lawyer prepared for the final pretrial, joking about his 1 year. The lawyer, a third-rate attorney who had handled 366 cases over 365 days, considered this the biggest case of his career. From the first time he saw Hyun-soo at the police station, he believed from Hyun-soo's kind and innocent eyes that he was not guilty, or if guilty, only of minor offenses like stealing his father's taxi, accepting diluted drugs from a stranger, failing to urgently help the victim, fleeing the scene out of panic, or driving under the influence. The police, however, had not investigated any other suspects and hid key evidence. Based on mistaken testimony, they wanted to take away an innocent university student's life. According to the highest principle of the Korean Constitution, without concrete evidence of murder, the defendant should be presumed innocent. The judge let the jury vote for the final verdict: 4 guilty, 5 not guilty, no unanimous decision. Normally, the majority would rule. Everyone expected Hyun-soo to be acquitted, but the judge declared the jury's decision was only a recommendation and that the final verdict would come from the judge alone. The judge's final decision shocked everyone. The case was closed with a guilty verdict. The murder case made nationwide headlines, helping the prosecutor get promoted and the old detective retire honorably. Back in prison, Hyun-soo sought comfort from Tego and his friends. Suddenly, gang members attacked Tego from behind, slashing his neck. In his final moments, Tego urged Hyun-soo not to give up. Meanwhile, lawyer Shin, refusing to accept the trial result, conducted a last investigation. He found a man lingering near the victim's home who had taken many photos on the night of the crime. The police had confiscated those photos. Shin got the photos from a detective friend. The truth was finally revealed. The photos showed the victim's last phone call, which implicated the girl's ex-lover as the real culprit. Hyun-soo's innocence was finally proven. The righteous lawyer Shin continued handling minor cases, but during a police visit, he saw a young woman helplessly sitting in the detention room's corner, a scene reminding him of Hyun-soo's past.